Okay, great. We're back for class number 2 already. It went so fast. Um, we're going to keep brainstorming. We'll keep working within the Google document. So as anything comes up for you, just go ahead and jot it down either in your journal and then take it over to the Google Doc, or just jot it down in the Google Doc. So I just want you guys to collaborate. The brainstorming process should be chaotic and fun, and remember to help each other expand on your ideas. Don't shoot them down. Do the thing you do in practicum where you're like, oh, that's a good idea. What would happen if you, and then ask a question. So expand on your ideas together, and let's see which ones that sort of everybody starts to really be drawn to. All right. So this is class 2, and in your workbook, I believe we're now on page 9. The section, that's not it. Let me go to the right section. Here we go. So the section is on treatment. So we're going to talk about that and go through some of the components that'll go into your treatments. Now, you'll notice that, especially for this class, reading George R.R. Martin's treatment for Game of Thrones gives you some really good insight into how he wrote his treatment for his books. Did you notice anything in his treatment that was changed rather drastically? I hope so. I hope you read it and were like, oh my gosh, they changed that. I thought that was pretty cool. It's cool to see, I think, as writers, to see the evolution of maybe what your original idea is and then how it goes through this collaborative process before it actually gets into our living rooms and in front of the eyes of the audience. Right, so you could see that definitely if you read his treatment and then watched Game of Thrones, obviously, and read the series, clearly. So let's go to our PowerPoint here. Great, so class 1 is over. We had our course introduction and discussion of idle days on the Yann, and now we are going to move forward with treatment and roles. So we're going to talk about these bullet points. What is a treatment? What's a log line? What is, world description, the central message, character bio, the outline of a story by scene, and character arcs. So we're going to go into talking about, today we're going to talk about treatments. We're going to talk about, for example, a premise, a log line, a beat outline, synopsis, a story outline. And then after that, we're going to talk about the roles that will be needed for this semester's project. Then we'll watch a couple videos, and then we'll go back over to our brainstorming document on Google Docs, and we'll continue brainstorming some ideas. Okay, so here we go. All right, so what is a treatment? So to answer this, we have to define some of the terms that we're using here. A premise is an idea for a story. And right now, that's pretty much all I want you guys to be brainstorming in the Google Doc. Of course, you can expand on your ideas and turn them into log lines, which I will get to. But a premise is an idea for a story. Man travels into a dream world and goes on a trip down the river, for example. The setup or the situation is what is talked about in the premise. There's little to no story implied here. The premise is also sort of rarely written down or pitched in front of people. But the log line is a little bit more full, and it focuses on the central situation of the story. It almost always implies a main character. It also gives a sense of tone / genre, and an idea of where the story leads. So the log line is usually written in 1 or 2 lines. I'm sure you guys all have access to Netflix and some other streaming services. You'll notice sometimes you'll see a premise described next to a new show or something, a new movie, and it's like, boy meets girl and world comes to an end. And you're like, that tells me nothing. So that's a pretty bad premise. No, I guess it's a good premise. It's a bad log line though. So with a log line, you want to make it a little bit more full, and you want to give us a better sense of what the story is about. There are certain premises that you could use to describe basically every zombie movie that's ever been made, for example. So how will you differentiate between Romero's Diary of the Dead and, for example, 28 Days Later? So what information do you put into that description that will let the audience know? Not the audience, actually, that's the end result, but the board or the people that you're pitching for. What are you going to do that's going to set the story apart? Here's an example. A studio reader pulls a flawless spec script from the slush pile, submitted by Shakespeare. She communicates with the idealistic bard by email as the script is shredded by the Hollywood studio system, and she falls in love along the way. Okay, that's a log line. That gives me an idea of the story, the characters, and what's going to happen. So the log line is actually the sort of thing that you put into your query letter. So you want to have enough to intrigue. There's a promise of more and a sense of completeness. So beware, a premise passed off as a log line is really just a bad log line, okay? So the premise is just a short idea. You're not really going to present it to anyone, but a log line is going to hook the person that you're telling the log line to, right? A beat outline is a sparsely written list of scenes or events. It's useful for a production draft. It's a quick way to visualize chunks of the story and also follow story logic. And it also helps to make changes much more easily. So instead of writing, a 120-page screenplay, you might want to write a 2 or 3-page beat outline that shows, what scenes connect to what scenes and the character arcs. And then you can see if something's not working, you can just switch scenes or move your bullet points around to make the story flow a little bit better. For me, I tried something new last year. I guess Tlina, Pauline, and Alicia and I decided, hey, how hard could it be to write a romance novel? So I actually took up that challenge and started writing one. But what I did was I incorporated, or I started out with a table of contents. And so each scene or each chapter within the romance book, I would add to the table of contents. So even if I hadn't written the chapter, I knew what I wanted to happen in the chapter. So as long as it was in the table of contents, it turns out to look like a beat outline. So I know what the progression is of the story and of the characters. The synopsis, then, that can basically be one long paragraph or several paragraphs. It's not usually more than a page and a half, usually less than that, and it's usually focused on plot. It's often a concise distillation of a story that exists in longer form, such as the synopsis of a script found in script coverage, which you guys haven't learned too much about, but some of you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, you're basically taking the idea of the story and, if it were a novel we were talking about, instead of 300 pages, maybe it's a couple pages written out of the plot of the story. The next thing is an outline or a story outline, and these words are often used interchangeably with synopsis, but in fact, they're always just a little bit longer with more detail. And here there's more emphasis on character, tone, and theme, not solely the plot-driven aspects that you have in the synopsis. A treatment then, and of course this is what you guys are going to write together as a group. The treatment is a full exploration of a story. So it's going to cover character, plot, setting, theme, and it also clarifies the intent of the writer. It can contain character descriptions, a synopsis, statements on theme and tone. It attempts to convey the film-going experience through to the story's end. And it might even include bits of key dialogue. It's usually more than 3 pages. In fact, the average size document is about 7 to 12 pages. So one interesting thing that you can compare this to would be your reading assignments for this week, which included story Bibles for Stranger Things and Grey's Anatomy, for example. You could tell that the story Bibles are of various lengths, and they also included different elements. So they all have some of the same elements, right? Like, what is this show about? Who are the characters? What's going to happen? What challenges will they face? But if you look at the story Bible for Stranger Things, originally called Montauk, you actually see images, like photographs of this closed down military base, right? And so that lent itself to the tone, the weirdness of what that show would become. You can also take a look at the example treatment for Game of Thrones, which is also in your course workbook, and that's Appendix F. Again, I hope you guys got a chance to read that because I found it to be so compelling and interesting from our perspective as writers, to see, like how someone so famous and, how completely popular Game of Thrones has been over the past few years, to see sort of where it started. I love, of course, at first that he writes, I don't outline my novels. I find that if I know exactly where a book is going, I lose all interest in writing it. I do, however, have some strong notions as to the overall structure of the story I'm telling and the eventual fate of many of the principal characters in the drama. And of course, then he goes on to basically outline his novels. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the roles that we will have this semester. And each of you will take on or perform some of these roles. So this grid is in your workbook on page 9. And here, you can take notes here, of course, but I would like you guys to start thinking about what role do you want to play this semester. Um, the continuity executive will make sure that all TV series, story ideas, and character arcs align with one another, as well as anything the other sub or secondary projects may bring into this story world. Continuity is extremely important. And here I'm going to show you a couple videos of why. Okay, so that gives you some ideas. I'm not sure if the tech is working here, so I'm going to include the link to the YouTube video so that you guys can watch it all the way through. But let's see if it works for film continuity errors, which is coming up now. Okay, so that gives you, some examples. I'm sure that you guys have seen continuity errors in shows and films and books that you've read already. And I know that you actually talked about those things within The Dark Crystal as well and Sherlock. So continuity is a pretty big job, and you want to make sure that you maintain continuity for audience enjoyment. Um, then we have the executive producer, and this person is more often called the showrunner. This is the person who makes executive decisions when debates or arguments arise about the story world. This is a mediator who works closely with the continuity executive to maintain consistency and clarity and continuity within the world and the story. So the third thing on our list in our workbook is the writer's room. The writer's room is where writers meet with execs and you all brainstorm and then you plot out the TV series together. This is a room where you can brainstorm story ideas, and the showrunner, continuity executive, and the other writers will talk about how it fits into the story world, and then what episode it should be. Writing a treatment and overview to make sure everyone is on the same page is a really good idea before you set out actually writing your episode in the series. So what we're going to do in the writer's room after we've brainstormed a lot in our Google Doc, we'll come up with an idea for the 3 episodes of the mini-series for Idle Days on the Yann. And remember, this can just be season 1. You could have it in your mind that perhaps there will be a season 2, a season 3, all the way up to, a season 25. We'll see what happens. For me, in Idle Days on the Yann, the short story, the world is so rich and diverse, and you can apply transmedia to this short story, and you could come up with multiple seasons of miniseries, or maybe longer series. Maybe they don't even have to be a miniseries. But for this semester, you're doing a 3-episode miniseries. So you'll get in a writer's room, you'll brainstorm, you'll talk about your ideas, and then you'll narrow it down to 3 episodes. Once you've decided on those 3 episodes, then you will break up into partners, and 2 people will write the pilot, 2 people will write episode 2, and 2 people will write episode 3. So you want to also remember that the pilot is the most important episode, because if it doesn't have legs, it won't get picked up by networks or funds for a production budget. Okay, and then if you look into the next section on your workbook, you'll see that for the semester projects, you'll choose 2 other secondary projects. So you can choose to work solo, you can choose to work with a partner on this, but here you can start writing down maybe some ideas that you have from Idle Days on the Yann for your first and second sub-projects. Also, I just want to point out that I've created this super cool document called Vocabulary Explosion. And for Vocabulary Explosion, what I've done is I've started adding some words down the side here. And I would like you guys to start filling in your own words. Any new words that come up in your writing, your reading, your researching, maybe any of the videos that you're watching, anything like that. And so you want to write it down here, fill out the word class. Is it a noun? Is it a verb? Is it an adverb? Is it an article? What is it? The pronunciation goes in the 3rd column, the definition, and then give an example so that we know how to use the word correctly. Okay, that's your vocabulary explosion document. Okay, back to our workbook. Here we go. Okay, so continuity executive, executive producer / showrunner, the writer's room, the first, second, and third episodes of the miniseries, and then 2 other forms of transmedia that are up to you. Okay, and here in the notes section, this is page 10. Here on the notes section is a link to the Google document for your vocabulary explosion. Okay. So now what I want you guys to do is take some time to brainstorm story ideas for a 3-episode television series. So remember that each episode will be between 35 to 55, 60 minutes long. That means that the page length is the same as the length of the show, of the episode. So if it's a 52-minute episode, then the script will be 52 pages. So obviously we can't write some of the premises and log lines on sheets of paper in the classroom, but we want to instead write this in your Google Doc, okay? With secondary projects, also use your Google Doc and start brainstorming sub-projects that maybe you want to work on. And the other thing I would like to see is, have you considered what genre you want to write? So let's go over here to our brainstorming document. Here we go. So here's our brainstorming document, and you want to just keep brainstorming ideas and secondary projects. On the next page, this is where we have brainstorming the premise. So brainstorm the premise for your 3-episode mini TV series here, okay? So if you want, you can actually go ahead and write a sentence. This series is about X. The first season will explore X. Episode 1 will be, what will it be? Whoops. Episode 2 will include what? Oh, I spelled it wrong. Let me just fix that. And episode 3 will conclude by, and fill that in there. Okay, so go ahead and start brainstorming. I'm really looking forward to hearing about your ideas that popped up and came out of a really close reading of Idle Days on the Yann. You can bring in dragons, you can bring in necromancy, you can bring in travel logs, you can bring in fantasy world, you can remove the main character and put him maybe back in the quote-unquote real world, or is it? You can do anything you want. So I really want to hear your ideas. I'm really looking forward to this part. And that's all you need to do for now. You'll like this. Your homework for Wednesday is nothing. So no homework if you've completed all of the readings. If you haven't had a chance to complete the readings, then please go ahead and do that. clearly you need to do a very close reading of Idle Days on the Yawn at this point and start brainstorming, working with that text and pulling out stories and plots and characters and ideas that will make our 3-episode miniseries exciting and interesting, and hopefully that the producers will want to pick it up for 10 more seasons. Okay, so get to that, and I will see you guys on Wednesday. Thanks.